If you're thinking of applying here, don't. This place is a trap. The words were spoken so softly, they nearly blended in with the clink of a spoon against a plate. A simple warning, seemingly casual, but it made the man at table 12 freeze. Elena, a slender waitress with eyes drained of all faith, had just set down a plate of chocolate bourbon cake and exhaled those words as if she had been holding them in for years. She didn't know who the customer was. She just thought he was a stranger, perhaps a traveler, having a quiet dinner. She couldn't have known he was Grayson Holt, the man who had founded the Maple and Oak restaurant chain with nothing but his own 2 hands and a simple dream to bring a decent meal to every small town in America. Grayson used to know the name of every chef, every dishwasher at each branch. But now, sitting in the very restaurant he had built, he had to disguise himself as an ordinary person to seek the truth. Because according to recent reports, the branch in Boulder, Colorado, once considered the new gem in his chain of 38 restaurants, was sinking in complaints, constant staff turnover, and a strangely suffocating atmosphere. From the outside, Maple and Oak still looked perfect, warm yellow lights, the alluring scent of grilled beef, napkins folded like something out of a magazine. But Grayson, with the intuition of a man who had washed every plate in a small kitchen 15 years ago, sensed something clearly. This place was rotting from the inside. An uncleared table, a flickering light bulb, an employee standing by the bar as if swallowing tears. These weren't operational errors. They were signs of a system that was fracturing. And Elena's words, simple yet brutally honest, had laid it all bare. This place is a trap. Those words weren't spoken as a complaint. They were a warning. And they not only made Grayson sit in silence for several minutes, but also awakened something within him that had long been dormant, the courage to face his own legacy. The grey rental car pulled up quietly in front of Maple and Oak, the Boulder branch. Grayson turned off the engine but remained in the car for a few more minutes. The sunset stretched across the hood, and in the rearview mirror was his own face, the founder, now wearing the disguise of a stranger, a worn flannel shirt, a cheap watch, a baseball cap pulled low, no powerful gestures, no CEO name tag, just a middle-aged man, stepping out of a forgotten memory, a place where he had once started with a cast-iron skillet, a makeshift wooden table, and a sincere ambition. Grayson got out of the car. The smell of grilled meat wafting from the restaurant made him pause for a beat, not because he was hungry, but because he remembered. That aroma had once been a sign of hope. Now, it felt like a deceptive welcome. He crossed the gravel parking lot and walked to the main entrance. Everything appeared to be as originally designed: a heavy oak door, sparkling gold ceiling lights, the soft sound of jazz music playing from within. But like an overly made-up house, something felt unreal. The trash can outside was overflowing. The light bulb on the awning flickered. A patch of paint was peeling right next to the sign. Just small details. But to Grayson, they were like the first cracks in a massive dam. He pushed the door open. Immediately, the chaotic noise of the restaurant hit him. Crowded tables, the smell of food, the clatter of silverware and clinking of glasses, forced laughter. A young woman at the hostess stand looked up, flashing a formulaic smile. "Welcome to Maple and Oak. A table for how many?" "Just me," Grayson replied, his voice a little higher than usual, trying to soften his image. "If you have a quiet corner, I'd appreciate it." The young woman led him to a corner table near the fireplace. It was in this very spot that Grayson had tested the grilled ribs 15 years ago, with the first chef he ever hired. Sitting down on the leather-upholstered chair, he began to observe not with the eyes of a customer, but with the eyes of a father searching for his lost child. 3 nearby tables had not been cleared. Cold bread sat in baskets, napkins still folded. A waiter rushed past, his face as tense as if he were dealing with a crisis. At the bar to the left, someone was wiping a glass, but wiped the same spot over and over as if killing time, afraid of having to do something else. The music was too loud. The rhythm of activity was chaotic. The staff didn't look at each other, only at the clock. Grayson leaned back, his eyes fixed on the floor. Each separate detail was like a brushstroke in an abstract painting. But he could see the whole picture. This wasn't just a bad shift. This was a gradual erosion, a silent collapse that started from the top. He didn't need anyone to say anything. He could feel it. Something was very wrong here. And if he was a step too slow, his life's legacy would be swallowed by silence, fear, and oblivion. Elena approached like a gentle breeze, both swift and cautious. Her uniform was neat, her hair in a tidy bun, her apron spotless. From a distance, she appeared to be the model of a perfect employee. But Grayson, with eyes that had witnessed thousands of hours of labor in a hot kitchen, didn't look at her appearance. He looked into her eyes, and he saw exhaustion. "Hello, I'm Elena. I'll be your server tonight. Can I get you started with something to drink?" Her voice was soft, not shaky, but not natural either. "Just water, and a glass of red wine, if the house red is decent." Eleanor was slightly surprised. The expression was fleeting, but enough for Grayson to notice she wasn't used to such polite customers. "Coming right up," she said, placing the menu in front of him with an unusually gentle touch. Eleanor, the name on her tag, was written in small capital letters. She gave a small nod, then turned away. But before leaving the table, she paused for half a second, then lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. "Tonight's special is the maple glazed beef. But if you're asking for my honest opinion, the roast chicken is a safer bet. The kitchen's been a bit inconsistent with the beef lately." That statement, concise and clever, carried more meaning than any internal report Grayson had ever read. Not rebellious, not defiant, just a well-timed whisper from someone who had grown too accustomed to disappointment. She left, leaving behind a silence that Grayson couldn't ignore. He watched her, her posture straight, her steps quick but not rushed. She moved as if there were a private soundtrack in her head, a rhythm others couldn't hear, perhaps a warning bell. He observed her every move, the way she refilled water, nodded her thanks, her quick glance as she passed the manager. Every time the manager appeared, her back tensed like a drawn bowstring. No one was yelling, no one was being scolded, but everyone was afraid. Grayson used to think burnout was normal in the restaurant industry, but this kind of burnout silent, quiet, with no escape, was a sign of a toxic system. A moment later, Elena returned with the water and wine. Placing them gently on the table, she asked, "Would you like me to recommend any dishes?" Grayson tilted his head, his voice gentle. "I think I'll be staying in this town for a while. Might even apply for a job here. It seems like a good place to work." The statement was delivered like a joke, but his eyes were not. Elena froze. The water pitcher she was holding hovered in mid-air for a fraction of a second. Then, almost instantly, she regained her rhythm, pouring the water as if nothing had happened. "Depends on what you're looking for," she said quietly, setting the glass down. "I've seen a lot of people come and go." Then she turned and walked away. Just one sentence. But Grayson understood clearly. She had just sent a signal, not obvious, not a cry for help, not an accusation, but enough for someone who wanted to understand. To understand. And he understood. Grayson set the menu aside, quietly observing the dining room while waiting for his food. At the table across from him, a couple checked their watches for the third time. To the left, a young server nearly bumped into a chair while avoiding the manager. Every movement here seemed rushed, but not urgent, more like everyone was trying to outrun an approaching storm. Elena returned with a beautifully presented plate of food, roast chicken with herbed potatoes, the very dish she had suggested. "Enjoy your meal," she said, placing the plate in front of Grayson with unusually careful hands. He looked at the food, then at her. "Thank you. Really. Is this dish okay?" Elena blinked, then gave a slight nod. "It's safe." She repeated her earlier word. "It's not our most impressive dish, but the kitchen usually doesn't mess up the chicken." Grayson gave a small, playful smile. "That sounds more like an insider's tip than a menu promotion." She looked at him, and this time her gaze didn't waver. There was something real in it, a sudden flash of unexpected sincerity. "It depends on what you expect from a place like this," she said. "A lot of customers come here because there aren't any better options. And the people who work here—" Elena looked at him for a second longer than necessary. "We used to have faith. At the old branch, different space, different management. Everyone knew each other's names. We even threw a birthday party for the head chef once. But then things changed." "How did they change?" She fell silent. Then she put on that smile that was more like a piece of armor. "You don't need to hear my complaints. I'm probably just tired." Grayson didn't reply with words. He just gave a slight nod, as if to show empathy without needing an explanation. And right at that moment, something very small happened. The manager emerged from the kitchen area, standing in the corner of the room like a wooden post, saying nothing, doing nothing. But the moment Eleanor finished her sentence, she immediately tightened her grip on her towel, adjusted her apron, and turned away. She wasn't scared. She was just used to being on guard. Grayson knew that kind of fear. It didn't come from being yelled at, but from being worn down, day after day. When Eleanor brought the dessert, a slice of the renowned chocolate bourbon cake, Grayson decided to try one more time. "You know," he said, I'm seriously thinking about applying for a job here. This town seems peaceful. The pace of life is slow. The people are friendly. Elena's hand froze just above the silver fork. She wasn't smiling. For the first time that evening, she looked at him, truly looked at him. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice dropping. Grayson nodded. He didn't answer. Eleanor took a deep breath and glanced around the restaurant. Then she spoke slowly, just loud enough for him to hear. "If you're considering a career change, there are better options out there." He tilted his head. "I thought this was one of the top choices." Eleanor gave a small laugh, but there was no joy in it. "They make it look that way. A beautiful website, photos of smiling employees. They talk about tips, advancement opportunities, health benefits. But the reality, this is a place people come to because they think they have a chance and stay because they're afraid they have nowhere else to go." She leaned in. "This place isn't a home. It's a trap." Those 3 words landed on the table like a stone. No echo, no noise, but they were suffocatingly heavy. Grayson didn't react right away. He just sat in silence, giving a slight nod. Then he said, "Thank you for your honesty." Elena blinked, as if she had just realized she'd gone too far. "I shouldn't have said that. Please forget it." And as if nothing had happened, she turned and blended back into the rushed movements of the restaurant. Left alone, Grayson looked at the cake that had once been his pride and joy. It was still delicious today, but he couldn't taste the sweetness anymore. He only felt dust and a profound disappointment settling in his heart. This place is a trap. Those 3 simple words echoed in Grayson's mind like a bell from the past ringing in the present. There was no accusation, no threat, just a statement uttered out of exhaustion, placed on the table like a truth no one wanted to admit. Eleanor was gone, but her words remained. Grayson sat still. The entire restaurant seemed to blur before his eyes. The clatter of cutlery, the laughter, the orders being called out, all of it was drowned out by a rising emptiness inside him. His hands, which had once built the first restaurant with recycled wood, now trembled slightly. He looked at the cake in front of him, a slice of chocolate bourbon cake, the dessert that had been his pride, the one he and his old head chef had tested dozens of times in a tiny model kitchen in Kansas City. Every ingredient had a story. Every layer of frosting was a memory. Now it lay silently on a porcelain plate, served with a warning. He picked up his fork and gently pierced the cake. He looked at it and felt a lump in his throat. It used to taste of belief. Today, it tasted of ashes. Elena's words replayed in his mind, not loud, not clear, but like an echo from a deep place. A beautiful website. But the reality is different. They promise to lift you up, but they just drain you and leave you behind. We don't stay because we love this place. We stay because we're afraid there's nowhere else to go. Grayson clenched his fists on his knees. His chest felt tight. He thought he had created a legacy, a brand to be proud of, a place where workers were respected, where culture and people went hand in hand. But he hadn't been looking, because he was busy expanding, because he trusted the reports too much, because he thought the company culture would sustain itself like that fireplace, that it would keep burning as long as you fed it wood. Grayson closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and then opened them to look around again. And this time, he saw clearly a bartender smiling at a customer, but his eyes were vacant. A young employee carrying a tray, but constantly glancing toward the manager's office. The small black lockbox behind the hostess stand, which Eleanor had glanced at as if checking to see who was watching. Everything was happening in silence. No one was speaking, but they were all crying for help. And now, he was no longer a customer listening in. He was the one who had caused that silence through his own absence, through his unintentional indifference. By letting the system give rise to people like Dean Rycroft and the way they suppressed Elena. Grayson pushed himself up, pulled out his wallet, and put a tip on the table, a larger amount than necessary, not to atone for his guilt, but to mark a first step. He couldn't turn back time, but he could come back. Before walking out of the restaurant, Grayson turned his head to look back one last time, not to say goodbye, not with regret, but to make a promise to himself. If Elena was brave enough to warn a stranger, then he, the founder, had to be brave enough to dismantle the trap he had unintentionally allowed to exist. The next evening, the parking lot behind Maple and Oak was as quiet as ever. But Grayson wasn't sitting in his car to rest. He was waiting not for a meal, but for an answer. Earlier, while paying his bill, he had gently asked Eleanor, "You told me I should think carefully if I plan to work here. I'm still thinking. Do you get a 10-minute break during your shift?" Elena said nothing. She only glanced at the clock and whispered, "After 7. The metal bench behind the warehouse. It was now 7:12. Grayson sat on the edge of an old bench, holding a bottle of water. The air was chilly. A distant streetlight flickered as if it knew what was about to be revealed. The sound of footsteps came from behind. Elena appeared, wearing a thin hoodie, holding a paper-wrapped sandwich and a cheap bottle of tea. No makeup, no rush, no defensiveness, just a woman accustomed to enduring. "You have 10 minutes, she said, sitting down without looking at him. "And I'm risking my job for this." Grayson nodded, his voice low. "Then I won't waste your time. I'm not looking for a job. I'm the founder of this system, and I need to understand what is happening in my name." Eleanor tensed. The sandwich stopped in midair. "Who? Are you Grayson Holt?" She put the sandwich down and was silent for a few seconds, not out of shock, but out of fatigue, as if, finally, the one person who could change everything had just appeared, and she didn't know whether to be hopeful or afraid. "Then you listen," she said softly. "This place isn't broken by accident. It was designed to be this way." Eleanor began to speak. Not quickly, not dramatically, just the truth, drawn from every late shift, every unanswered email, every unpaid overtime hour. "We're kept at 29 hours a week, so we don't qualify for insurance. But the workload is for someone working 35. The manager always says, 'Just for tonight. Help the team out a little. But if you agree, you get wrung dry. If you refuse, Your hours get cut the next week." Grayson's hands formed fists. His jaw tightened. "And the tips?" he asked. Eleanor let out a laugh, not a happy one. "They call it a tip pool. It's divided up every month, which sounds fair, but no one ever sees where that money really goes. They deduct what they call administrative fees, repair fees, performance fees. One month I worked 10 shifts and got $94. A friend of mine ended up with -$3. She looked at Grayson, her eyes no longer afraid but direct. "We have no paper trail to file a complaint. HR doesn't respond. Bonuses are promised, then postponed. And advancement opportunities. Every quarter they're delayed for internal review. No one ever moves up. We're kept at the bottom." "Why do you stay?" Grayson asked, though he already knew the answer. "Because I have a mother who needs medicine. Because there's someone worse off waiting to take my spot if I leave. And because I used to believe that if I just tried hard enough, things would be different." She turned to look him straight in the eye. "But this system wasn't created to reward effort. It only knows how to devour the one who stays silent the longest." Grayson said nothing. He looked at the woman before him, an ordinary person, doing something extraordinary, speaking the truth, without knowing if anyone would listen. "You've told me what I needed to know," he said quietly. "The question is, if there was a way to change this, would you be willing?" Elena frowned. Real change, or another inspirational speech before everything goes back to the way it was. Grayson silently took out a thick envelope and placed it in her hand. "In here is a list of employees from other branches, people who have also spoken up, and a secure phone. No one can track it. Don't use it outside of work hours. Don't use it at home. But it connects you to me and to them." Eleanor looked at the phone, weighed her options. Her hand trembled slightly. "Why me?" she asked. Grayson looked at her, his voice as solid as oak. "Because you were the only one brave enough to warn a stranger. And because you have something many people have lost the belief that what's right is still worth fighting for." 3 days later, Grayson's small hotel room was no longer a place to rest. It had become a temporary command center where the desk lamp burned all night, and every inch of the walls was covered in notes, printed reports, and maps connected by red thread. On the bed, pay stubs, outsourced contracts, and internal emails were marked with a red highlighter. On the wall was a regional map, 15 Maple and Oak branches under the direct management of Dean Rycroft, the regional director. Red pins marked locations where employees had provided information. Black threads connected the dots like the tangled nervous system of a hiding beast. It all started with one sentence: "This is a trap." And now Grayson was beginning to see who set the trap and why. He moved quickly but not hastily. Every step was calculated. At each new branch, he appeared with a different identity: an insurance specialist, a freelance photographer, a single father relocating. Everywhere he went, he saw the same pattern: exhausted employees, unstable hours, a black lockbox for tips near the hostess stand, branch managers who weren't friendly, who didn't support operations but supervised like prison wardens. At a branch in Tulsa, he found an employee who was manually logging tips in a notebook, cross-referencing them with her official paycheck, finding a nearly 40% discrepancy. In Wichita, a chef showed him a photo of a bonus sheet that had been torn in half and thrown into a paper shredder bin, a sheet the staff had never seen in its original form. In St. Louis, a bartender showed him a tip distribution chart that had been manually adjusted by hand, and this was the same person who had almost been fired for asking questions in the wrong places. Grayson knew he needed a breakthrough. He called the only person he trusted completely, Arlene, his assistant who had been with him since the beginning. "I need you to do something," he said, his voice low. "Not through internal channels, not the system. You have to go to the source, the accounting books for the Boulder region. Find out where the money is going." 3 hours later, Arlene called back. Over the secure line, her voice came through, every word clear and as cold as steel. "You were right to be suspicious. Dean Rycroft has set up an entire parallel financial system." Grayson shot to his feet. The hotel room suddenly felt small. "Are you sure?" "I verified it with third-party auditing software. There are 2 sets of reports, one sent to headquarters, one used internally. The major discrepancies are in items like personnel allowances, internal promotions, temporary coordination fees. But in reality, they are funds from deliberate embezzlement." Arlene paused for a beat. Then she lowered her voice. "Dean isn't working alone. There's a company called Fair Pay Logistics that was hired as the payroll processing unit last year, approved by Dean himself. No one checked it thoroughly because the file was perfect, but that company was founded just 3 weeks before the contract began." Grayson clenched his fist, his face pale. "A front," he muttered. "A shell company." "There's more," Arlene said. "I did more digging. The company's shares are registered in the names of Dean's wife, his cousin, and a foreign financial broker. And guess what? 3 months ago, Dean bought a vacation home in Aspen, paid in cash." Grayson leaned his back against the wall, his heart pounding like a hammer. This was no longer a case of poor management. This was organized crime. And the worst part, it was happening under his name. "One more thing," he whispered. "Why didn't anyone at headquarters find out?" Arlene was silent. Then she said, "Because someone high up has been burying the complaints. There's a hand in the finance department, or human resources, or both." Grayson nodded. No more words were needed. The investigation had now gone beyond the limits of a single branch. It was a tumor, spreading from the core of the system, and he, the man who once stood at a stove with his hands covered in dish soap, would now have to lead the fight to resurrect his own company. As the sun set behind the Colorado mountains, inside Grayson's hotel room, a counter-offensive plan began to take shape, not with reports, not with emails, but with trust and evidence. In his hands, he now had 2 precious things: the truth, and the people willing to risk everything to speak it. And at the center of it all was Elena. He called her again that night from a disposable phone, the sound small and cautious. "Do you still want to make a change?" "I do," Elena replied without hesitation. "But I can't do it alone." Grayson smiled. "You won't be alone anymore." Within 48 hours, an underground network began to form. Elena took on the role of the point person at the Boulder branch. From there, she quietly recruited a quiet chef who had been passed over for promotion twice, a student hostess burdened with tuition debt and no insurance despite working over 30 hours a week, a dishwasher with arthritis who was frequently docked pay every time he took a bathroom break. Each person was given a secure phone not to be used outside of work, not to be taken home, with no contacts saved. Each device only communicated with Grayson and the other nodes in the regional branches. In St. Louis, a veteran bartender sent a photo of a timesheet that had been manually altered. In Tulsa, an assistant manager leaked a draft of a proposal to cut bonuses that had been sent internally but never publicly disclosed to employees. In Wichita, a busser found shredded copies of bonus terms in a paper shredder bin terms that had never been distributed. All data was forwarded to a secret team, Arlene and Sophia Chen, an honest auditor who had been overlooked last year when she discovered irregularities. Now, Sophia officially became the central data analyst for the campaign. Every piece of evidence was time-stamped, every file was encrypted, every connection was triple-checked before being shared. Grayson, though the leader, no longer appeared in person. Instead, he began to pull the strings from behind the scenes, requesting bank statement backups from accounting for insurance purposes, activating a routine regional audit, creating a fake technical glitch in the payroll system, forcing Dean Rycroft to send a clarifying email revealing impatient wording. Dean began to sense something was wrong, and he reacted by tightening his control. He called an urgent all-region meeting, warning them not to let the culture be distorted by outsiders. He installed a camera in the employee break room. He banned the use of personal phones during work hours. He started conducting surprise bag checks after shifts. Elena noticed it immediately. He knows someone is watching. But instead of retreating, the network reacted in the opposite way. A kitchen staffer in Denver wrote in the secret group, "We're doing the right thing. If they're scared, it means the truth is getting closer." Sophia Chen began to compile the data. A summary sheet took shape over $8.3 million lost through various means. Non-transparent tip deductions, intentional hour reductions, unexplained fees, unreasonably withheld bonuses. Grayson looked at the numbers, but his heart could not be calm. Behind each line in that Excel sheet was a meal that was cut, a dose of medicine that couldn't be bought, a child without health insurance in the secret chat group. Grayson sent a short message. "It's almost time. Hold your positions. Stay silent, but do not back down." And all the secure phones reported the message as read. No one dropped out. No one gave up. And Eleanor, once a person who just nodded her way through a shift, was now becoming a quiet commander, leading a revolution with no name, no banners, no slogans, but one that carried the weight of justice that had been buried for too long. Day 11 since the campaign began. Not a single media outlet knew. Not a single internal report had been filed. But Dean Rycroft could smell the resistance. And like any person who controls power through fear, he didn't need evidence to act. He just needed silence from his opponent, and this time, he wasn't getting it. Monday afternoon, 4:32 p.m. A knock on the office door echoed through the afternoon shift at the Maple and Oak Boulder branch. Eleanor was cleaning the coffee station when she was summoned not with words, but with the cold stare of the shift manager. "Dean wants to see you. Now." She knew it would come sooner or later, but not this soon. The room behind the kitchen, the manager's office, was a place employees never entered unless they were in trouble. Elena walked in, her back straight but her heart pounding. Dean Rycroft was sitting behind a dark wood desk, smiling like a man who was certain he was winning. He wasn't wearing his usual work shirt, but a sharply tailored grey suit jacket, as if this were an official interrogation. "Hello, Elena." His voice was soft, but a vein was twitching in his neck. "Have a seat." She didn't sit. "I was only called during my break." Dean was still smiling. "Actually, I think you've been using quite a bit of your personal time for private matters, haven't you?" He slid a thin file toward her. Inside were system printouts, the times she had logged into the management software after hours, a few blurry photos, possibly of her looking at the shift schedule or holding a printout. "We monitor everything," Dean said, his voice even. "You've taken photos of the schedule. You've looked up bonus figures outside your authority. You've had unauthorized communication with employees from other branches." He steepled his fingers in front of him, his gaze as sharp as a knife. "Do you know how that behavior is defined in your contract?" Elena replied softly, but without a tremor. "As taking an interest in things the company should have explained." Dean stopped smiling. "We've processed your termination, effective immediately. HR will contact you about any remaining deductions. And just as a reminder, your confidentiality agreement includes a financial penalty for disclosing any information deemed internal." She said nothing. He stood up, tapped his fingers on the file, and then said quietly, "And if you think you're playing the hero in some story about justice, I'm warning you, people like you don't last long in this industry." Just then, a knock came at the door. A hostess poked her head in, her face pale. "Excuse me, but there's a group from corporate that just arrived. They're demanding an all-staff meeting. Immediately." Dean blinked. "That's not until next week." "No, they said today." Dean shot to his feet, adjusting his tie. "You stay here," he said to Elena, then strode out of the room like a general heading into battle. Elena was left alone. Her hands gripped the sides of her chair. Her heart was pounding. She didn't know what was happening, but her gut told her this wasn't a trap for her, but a trap for him. The secure phone in her pocket vibrated softly. A single message appeared. "Don't leave the room. Wait for the signal. Trust me. G.H. Grayson." She stood up, Without hesitation, she opened the door, not to run away, but to take a front row seat at the meeting that would decide everyone's fate. The dining room of maple and oak was cleared in less than 10 minutes. The oak tables were pushed to one side, chairs arranged in rows like an emergency press conference. Employees stood scattered about, their eyes bewildered, hands clutching trays, napkins, menus, as if holding on to something familiar in the middle of a storm. Eleanor entered from behind the kitchen. Just in time, she quietly chose a spot in the front row, her heart still hammering from the confrontation less than 10 minutes earlier. 3 people stood at the front of the room, 2 women, 1 man. One of them was Sophia Chen, the internal auditor whose photo Eleanor had seen in an email. She was opening a laptop, connecting it to a large screen temporarily mounted on the brick wall. The man had his back to the room, a familiar figure, broad shoulders, standing as steady as an old tree. Elena held her breath. Dean entered from a side door, still with his controlling stride and a tight, forced smile. "Excuse me, everyone. I'm Dean Rycroft, your regional director. I believe this meeting is a small misunderstanding that we can all clear up together." He walked quickly to the front of the room, looking directly at the group of 3 as if trying to reclaim the stage. The man turned around. The room went silent. Dean froze mid-stride, as if he'd just seen a ghost. Grayson Holt. No more flannel shirt. No more baseball cap. Instead, a simple, neat black suit. His grey hair was carefully combed, and his eyes no longer a vague gaze, but the look of the founder of an empire. "Hello, Dean," Grayson said, his voice even and clear. "This meeting is not a misunderstanding. This is the truth, and it started with a dessert and a single sentence: this place is a trap." The staff began to whisper. Dean froze. "Grayson, I think we should talk privately." "There's no need." Grayson cut him off, his eyes looking directly at everyone. "Today, I didn't come here to talk privately. I came to make public what should never have been hidden." He signaled to Sophia. The screen behind him lit up. A series of images and data appeared. Altered timesheets, tip charts with manipulated numbers, a map of exploited branches, vague, unexplained deductions. "Over the past month," Grayson said slowly, "we have investigated this entire region's operations. The result: over $8.3 million has been embezzled. Not just money, but your trust, your time, and your energy. You, the people who keep this place running every day." Dean tried to regain control. "This is a fabrication. It's a witch hunt. I demand to speak with my lawyer." "You will have a lawyer," Grayson replied, "right after you speak with the police." The door opened. 2 security officers not from the restaurant entered, wearing badges from a financial investigation agency. "Dean Rycroft, you are under arrest for financial fraud, abuse of office, and employee exploitation." Dean struggled. "Grayson, you're destroying your own system." Grayson looked at him, his eyes no longer angry, but pained. "No, Dean, you destroyed it. I'm just fixing it." Dean was led out in handcuffs. The room erupted not in applause, but in choked relief. A bartender covered his face and cried. A kitchen staffer let out a sigh, as if a great weight had been lifted from his chest. A young hostess took Eleanor's hand. Grayson turned back to face the room. "The person who opened my eyes wasn't a manager, not a director. It was a waitress, someone who was brave enough to warn a stranger that this place was becoming a trap." He turned toward Elena, who was slowly standing up, her eyes filled with disbelief. "Elena Marsh, as of today, you will have a new role, Director of the Employee Protection Division for the entire region. I will report directly to you, and this time no one will be able to silence the truth." The whole room erupted, not because someone had been arrested, but because finally someone had stood up. For them, 6 months after that fateful meeting, the Maple and Oak branch in Boulder still had its warm yellow lights, the scent of maple grilled beef, and the soft jazz music playing by the fireplace. But no one was mistaken. This place was no longer the same. No more tiptoeing footsteps, no more furtive glances from the kitchen, no more tired smiles just to survive. Instead, there was a rhythm of life, real and healthy. Eleanor Marsh no longer wore an apron or carried a tray. She stood at the hostess station, holding a tablet, adjusting the work schedule for a young trainee. "It's okay," she smiled. "You can go slow, as long as you don't give up. Here, no one gets punished for needing more time." The young woman nodded, her eyes grateful, something Eleanor had dreamed of for the 5 years she worked as a faceless employee. Grayson didn't go back to the office right after Dean Rycroft's downfall. Instead, he traveled throughout the region, cooking with chefs in Wichita, washing dishes in Tulsa, tending bar in St. Louis. Every employee was given a card with his personal email address, no secretary, no filter. The company culture was rebuilt from the ground up. Work hours were made transparent through a mobile app. Tips were distributed in real time, with no third party. Any employee working over 20 hours a week received health insurance. And every branch had a direct feedback box, which was sent to Elena. In her new office, also a small corner above the old restaurant, Elena ran the Employee Protection Division, where she held open roundtables twice a month. No managers, no recordings, just the truth. "Back then, we had to whisper the truth behind the kitchen," she once said. "Now, we say it in the light, and we are heard." One late afternoon, Grayson came to see her. No ceremony, no notice. He just stood, leaning against the doorframe, watching her look up from a payroll screen. "Better?" he asked softly. Eleanor smiled a real smile. "Not better, righter." Grayson sat down in the chair opposite her. For the first time since the day he walked into the restaurant as a stranger, they faced each other. No roles, no status, just two people who had been hurt, now helping others from being hurt. He placed a thin file on the table, a white cover, a small logo, a single line of text, the Ironwood Foundation, for a fair and decent work environment. "Elena," he said, "I want you to lead it, not just for Maple and Oak, but for this entire industry." She was silent for a few seconds. She looked at the words on the cover. Then she looked at the man who had recognized the truth from just a slice of cake and a whisper. "Do you really believe we can change the whole industry?" Grayson smiled, a gentle, steady smile, like an old craftsman laying the first brick. "I believe change always starts with one person who dares not to be silent, and you were the first." Eleanor nodded, her eyes welling with tears that didn't fall, because for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was climbing up. She felt like she was opening a door for others to walk through. There are places that start as a dream and over the years become silent traps. And there are people without power, without a voice, who are brave enough to relight the lamp that the entire system tried to extinguish. Elena Marsh was once a waitress standing in the shadows, working just to survive, believing she couldn't change anything. But then she whispered the truth to a stranger, not knowing that very sentence would ignite a quiet revolution. If you're thinking of applying here, don't. This place is a trap. That sentence wasn't a complaint. It was a wake-up call, not to seek pity, but to create change. Grayson Holt, the founder of Maple and Oak, once thought he had finished building his dream, but he forgot a system cannot heal itself if the person who created it stops listening, and he chose not to retreat, not to defend, but to return from the very bottom of betrayed trust. He didn't stand on a stage or speak at conferences. He washed dishes. He worked the counter. He listened not to respond, but to understand. When Dean Rycroft was arrested, when the network of exploitation was dismantled, when people like Jesse the bartender, fired for taking a picture at the wrong time, were reinstated with an official apology. Justice was no longer a slogan. It became an action. Today, Maple and Oak is no longer just a restaurant chain. It is a testament to an unshakable principle. Respect is not a policy. It is a promise kept through action, protected by the system, and passed on by people. Eleanor now represents not just the employees of one company. She represents those who were once pushed aside but never fell. She did not rise through power. She rose through truth. And in every shift, every email, every open meeting, she doesn't seek respect for herself. She clears a path for others to enter and be heard. Because sometimes change doesn't start with a plan. It starts with one person who dares to speak up when others choose to be silent. Some traps are not built with iron and steel, but with silence and fear. And there are people who, despite having no power in their hands, still dare to speak up, not because they are not afraid, but because they know if no one starts, there will never be an end. If you have ever worked in a place like that, or ever wished someone would stand up, then today, remember, one person who dares to speak the truth can change an entire system.